Okay, recording. So here we are. I am here with my good friend Ray Owen. Ray, do you want to introduce yourself? Who are you? Who the hell are you?
Who the hell am I? That's a question I ask myself often. Who the hell am I to dot, 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 dot. And the answer is, yeah, I'm Ray Owen. I am, I guess, many things. Part of the context of being here is I'm a psychologist, and and you and I, Rich, have known each other for 10 years, is it?
I'm going to
Um,
say 11.
gosh, gosh. Given that, although actually we work with slightly different groups of people, we both share this sort of common way of working with people, this kind of common psychological approach. That's how we got to know each other. So I guess that means that you've got to introduce yourself, Rich.
Probably should. Yeah, so my name's Rich. So, yeah, I work as a clinical psychologist and cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. And I met you at a conference. I think it was the first UK conference for acceptance and commitment therapy, which is, I guess, a type of therapy that we probably have in common, right? We both subscribe to that way of thinking, probably influences us personally and professionally. And yeah, that's I think where we met. Actually, we met. I know exactly where we met. We met in. I mean, this is going to sound really weird to anyone outside of these professional circles. We met whilst making some sort of body sculpture of the UK. Do you remember that?
Was that the first time? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we're trying to find out how many people at this conference were from like different areas or whether people that have lived and worked near each other. Yes. So we did this sort of thing where we had a big space in a room and got everybody to move to like an imagined map and worked out that quite a few of us were sort of in the Midlands of England.
That's right. Yeah. So we ended up kind of standing next to each other because, yeah, in this imagined version of the UK, we were geographically located fairly closely, weren't we?
Yeah, yeah, just yeah. I mean, we probably live about sort of 45 minutes from each other, but
Yeah.
in terms of clusters of population, yeah, yeah, absolutely very close.
I often think about working as a psychologist. There are moments in your life, probably wherever you work, whoever you are, there's moments in your life where you find yourself in a situation and you think, what sort of choices did I make that have brought me to this moment that where I'm making some kind of weird body sculpture of the UK. Nevertheless, that's what happened. And we met each other then, and we've stayed firm friends and colleagues ever since. And so when this idea of making a podcast came to my consciousness, you were the first person I thought of in terms of who would I like to do this with.
Very touched that that was your first response.
Well, there we are. We'll see, won't we, whether that turns out to have been a good decision or not. But why are we here? We should probably say something about why we're here, what we're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why are you here? Why are you here?
Why are we here? Well, I think I'm here in order to in order to have a conversation with a friend, but a conversation with a friend that's kind of about some fairly broad issues of life. Then it's based on the fact that two of us come, I suppose, from similar perspectives, thinking about working in psychology. I think it kind of does influence how you end up reacting to stuff. Doesn't mean, you know, you're seeing things clearer or you're seeing things better, but and maybe that's something that'd be interesting for the two of us to talk about.
We should probably address the title, shouldn't we? And I think that was our plan to address the title of this podcast over the next few episodes. But firstly, we wanted to address this idea of two. Yeah, because I thought when I had this idea that I'd like to do something a bit different. This is part of aging, I think, and part of wanting to broaden your horizons, keep doing things that are new and challenging. I definitely didn't want to do it on my own, right? I didn't want to sit and do a monologue. And having been involved in various other projects, I've never done a podcast before, not properly. I've been a guest on one or two. I did not want to sit in front of a microphone doing a monologue. So the first thing that really came to my mind was who could I do this with? Who could I connect with? How could I contribute something kind of meaningful and hopefully interesting to the world, and definitely had the idea that I didn't want to do that on my own.
And I heard it said just recently that, in the old days, a couple of middle-aged blokes decided they wanted to do something different. They'd have formed a band, and now they start doing a podcast. So, I mean, we're both sort of amateur musicians as well. So we could have gone the other route. We could have been a band, but we decided to do a podcast of two old psychologists talking about stuff, talking about life.
Yeah, I feel like this is probably the lesser of those two evils, if I'm honest. I'm not sure anyone wants to listen to the kind of music that we would make now. Do you think we need to address the great big old white male elephant in the room? Do you think we should just say something about that?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely, absolutely.
I remember when I first floated this idea to you, we were in a pub, and you looked at me with a look that I can only sort of describe as, I don't know, it was contempt, disdain, like I was asking for something terrible. You know, I'd made some awful social faux pas, and you said something like, as if there aren't enough white middle class men making podcasts. You know, almost like the last thing you would want to do is kind of add to that great big heap of detritus that's out there already.
Yeah, yeah, and I remember the second question being, my wife saying to your partner, Rich, "Had he already asked you and you've turned him down?" And her saying, "Nope, he hasn't asked me."
I think, and maybe this is one of the things about getting older. I think I've probably gone a little bit past the point of feeling like I have to apologize about just being who I am. You know, it wasn't of my choosing. I didn't choose to be born. I didn't choose to be born white or male. I like to think for as much as I'm sensitive, and I think it's important to be so, particularly when you kind of, perhaps belong to the group that's enjoyed a lot of power and privilege in society. At the same time, I don't think I need to apologize for it. And I think that we have probably both got something interesting to say, irrespective of the fact that we represent a somewhat limited demographic, don't we?
Yeah, the context of this is us choosing to do a podcast which people can listen to, not listen to. And I know because we've both been in this situation, there are other contexts where perhaps, we're both involved in presenting things at academic conferences, where you would say that you're putting together a group of people. And there we would very intentionally say, absolutely no way that we're going to do this panel just all men. If we found ourselves on the verge of that happening, I think under those circumstances, you'd say, well, that's a different kind of setting, different sorts of responsibilities and different sort of drivers to get other sorts of perspectives in.
No, I think that's fair, and I think there's a big wide world out there, lots to choose from. This is just one option, isn't it? Okay, so that said, the question I think that's on my mind here is that why was my first intuition to think about who am I going to do this with? Why do you think connection is so important? Why do you think hanging out with other human beings is so important?
I mean, it's easy to come out with kind of the first response that sort of my background and my work puts into my mouth, which is to say something like, by and large, humans are a social species. We often say, don't we? Humans are a bit of a campfire species. We're not, we don't have armor, we don't have claws, we don't have wings. Those aren't the survival benefits this species has. We do seem to survive better in groups. Back in our evolutionary history, probably survived in small tribes, campfires, keeping each other safe. So that being the case, we're all the descendants of the ones who fitted in to that because the others kicked out of the tribe and got eaten by the wolves. So I guess from my point of view, it kind of suggests that we feel safer with other humans.
I don't know if it's been your experience, but I think I've encountered people sort of through my professional life, and I think I've been guilty of this myself sometimes, as almost talking about the need for connection with others as being a problem, like it somehow reflects badly on me. So I've heard people say things like, I'm just so needy," or "I worry about being a burden." So it's interesting, isn't it, that because I think I would agree with you that it feels like an innate kind of drive, doesn't it? It feels like this is just the kind of species that we are. We like hanging out together. We like communing with each other. We like sitting around a campfire, breaking bread, all of those kinds of ways of talking about it. And yet, there is also this thing that seems to persist about this idea that it's somehow a bad thing, or that you could use it as a stick to beat yourself with if you can't be entirely independent and self sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, I get, and I guess for some things that can come with how we connect with others, I think some of those stories people carry about themselves as being needy or asking too much, might be about how they're with others rather than the very fact of being with others. And I think we also have to slightly watch out for like I don't know, the cultural stories of, there is this way of being with others and that's okay. And indeed, for some people, less social contact suits them more. And then they feel potentially, or they get a message that they are somehow a failure. Then they get punished for that.
One of the things that strikes me is going to keep coming up here. We probably address it at the outset. Is the whole "it depends" answer. The kind of psychology that we're both into is one that really stresses the importance of context, right? So there's nothing that's intrinsically right or wrong, nothing that's intrinsically good or bad, nothing that's intrinsically helpful or unhelpful, because it always depends on the context. That would be fair to say, right? So, there are going to be some people for whom, based on their history, based on their current circumstances, contact with others is something they really crave. And then there's going to be other people for exactly the same reasons. Contact with others is something they desperately want to avoid.
Absolutely. And it is a separate kind of function of society and attitudes that then puts on this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. When actually what we can say is this is a thing that happens. Had an interesting conversation about what are the enduring messages of different universal truths that we've learned from chemistry, from physics, and so on. And then the slightly awkward question, what are the kind of more universal truths that we've really learned from psychology? Because, most individual psychology theories, they're very popular for a while, and then we start thinking differently. Universal things that psychology does tell us is context matters. Sometimes people forget that. That should be a basis of our understanding.
It strikes me that we need to be careful about this because there's a danger and we're just going to agree about everything, or we're just going to say it depends always in answer to every question. Which feels like kind of the short version of every psychology essay I wrote in my undergrad degree. Compare and contrast these two theories. Well, there's a bit of this, there's a bit of that.
Are we going to end every podcast with further research is required?
I think so. Yeah. Like every single paper that you've ever read. Yeah. So we need to be careful about that. But yeah, at the risk of agreeing with you, I agree with you. There's some setting conditions, aren't there? I think, human beings are intensely social, and at a basic level, hanging out with other people is generally quite good for you. And I think if you think about what's the most aversive thing we do to people in prison is we put them in solitary confinement, right? Because it's just so horrible. It's the sort of ultimate sanction in the UK anyway. I believe other countries have other ultimate sanctions, but in the UK, the ultimate sort of sanction is life in prison. And if you behave badly there, then you are placed in solitary confinement because it's so aversive. Because just being on your own in a way that you can't control is horrible. But that doesn't mean, of course, that people might want to spend portions of time on their own, and there's nothing wrong with that. I would want people listening to this to definitely go away with a message that like everything's allowed, right? Everything is permissible, and there's nothing wrong with you if you are more introverted. You feel like someone who wants to spend more time alone, then there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, absolutely. People get sources of fulfillment in quite different ways. And part of the it depends thing is what's a definition of the worst weekend you could have or the best weekend you could have. And depending on who you ask, it's probably Glastonbury. For some people, it's the best thing that they ever experience. And for some people, it's just a definition of hell.
Where do you stand on this? Like, if I said to you, introvert, extrovert, what do you think you are? And you're not allowed to say it depends
Introvert who enjoys little bursts of extroversion.
on your own terms.
Yeah, on my own terms. I suppose the time when I'm most social is just because of the kind of life I've lived at things like academic conferences. And under those circumstances, I really enjoy being sort of in and around people. And after 3 or 4 days, I also intensely crave quiet and my own company. And I think we've talked about this actually. We're at a conference in an amazing place with surrounded by amazing people a couple of years ago. And I remember on my last night there before I flew back, I sneaked off to go to the movies by myself just because I wanted to be on my own. Even though I was surrounded by people, who I care for deeply and I really enjoy their company. So yeah, there's a lot of me that's about, I think, being kind of basically quiet and I do more extrovert things at times. What about you?
Mm. Well, it's interesting. I'm a little similar to that, but I don't think I always was. I think that's something that's changed as I've got older. I think I used to position myself as the kind of life and soul of the party, always sort of wanted to be the funniest, most engaging person in the room. And my need for doing that has drastically changed over the years. And I find myself more and more now craving quiet, peace, a house in the country, that kind of thing, quiet walks with the dog. That's the sort of thing that seems to appeal to me more. And yeah, it's interesting that I wonder if there's an aging. Well, there's a role for aging in all of that, that it changes over time, which comes back to the sort of whole context and it depends thing, I suppose. That it's not fixed, it's not static.
Yeah, we are, I think, both lucky enough to have done some interesting stuff in our time. And I don't know about you, but I get tired easier now. Going back to the Glastonbury thing, one of the things looking at it on the TV, it's exhausting. Some of that quiet life, even if it's, good physical exercise, walking across the fields and stuff, it's kind of different from I suppose, the social energy.
I've been to Glastonbury a number of times, and I first went in 1987, which will give you an idea of how old I might be. There's a part of me now, I've become really curmudgeonly about it all. Like I was on the BBC News app the other day, and one of the news items was Glastonbury gates open, and that was it. It's like, is that the news? Is that the news? Some gates have opened on a festival. It's become this really central sort of cultural point. Like when I went, there weren't any TV cameras there. There wasn't any police there. There were no police. There was a travellers' field. Like if you're a traveller, you could just get in for free. It was the Glastonbury CND Festival, so the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. If people are too young to remember that, once it was gone, it was gone. Do you know what I mean? You were there, and then it happened, and then it was finished. And like, I can't find any. I've looked a couple of times. I can't find any like videos of performances from back then. Do you know what I mean? And now I find myself being really old and curmudgeonly. I'm like, why is this wall to wall coverage of this thing now? It was something else back then. Now it's changed into something kind of very kind of corporate and mainstream. Yeah,
Produced.
and yeah, produced. And you're right, I couldn't be asked to go anymore. It's just too much energy. I couldn't face the walk from the car to the tent. That would be just couldn't be bothered.
I did watch a little bit on telly of a couple of kind of artists I like, and it was interesting that like one of them was somebody I've been to see a couple of times live, Paul Heaton. The actor. Now, yeah, I've actually been to gigs a few times just to watch him, and so yeah, he was on there, and it was a great set, loads and lots of people there, and I was thinking, well, I had a much better experience when I just went to see him at Birmingham, and you did a full set, and then came home, slept in my own bed. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, a stage further than that, I've now become, myself and my wife, we've become matinee people. So, if we go to the theatre or anything, if at all possible, we go to the matinee. Going into something like that during the afternoon feels like playing hooky. And then you come out at like 5 o'clock, really easy to find something to eat. You're not rushed before the curtain up. And then you drive home and you're sitting on your own sofa with a cup of tea by 8 o'clock. I mean, it's just the dream.
Life in the fast lane, eh? So, what are we going to take away from this conversation then? So, connection, it's important. Life feels like, a solitary life doesn't feel like a life that really most of us would want to live. And it's kind of okay for some people. And so, yeah, it depends. There's something kind of innately social about most of us, and for the vast majority of us, it's quite a drive, isn't there, to be with other people. And so, yeah, I guess the one thing I would want to reflect on is it's not a bad thing, right? It's not a black mark against your character if you're being too needy. I don't think it's really a thing, right? That's just being a human being. Nothing wrong with that, and not a fixed thing either, as your experience that you've just described kind of illustrates there, that this may change over time, and your desire to be around people, particularly large groups of people, may change.
Absolutely. And it's not, as you say, it's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just
A thing.
and I think it does also play out in how we think about things. And we can do some of that in the privacy of our own heads. Actually, my experience is that things move forward for me most in my thinking. Often when I'm talking to another person, perspective is to shift or develop. Not necessarily just I ditch my idea and take theirs, but my own view of it begins to develop.
Okay. So one regular feature that we're going to have on this show is that I'm going to throw a question at you. And in a feature that is going to be known as Let's Ask Ray, Shall We? This is a tribute in some part to a wonderful film, Mike Leigh film from years ago, Nuts in May. And my mate Rufus, whenever we talk about you, he shouts out,
Let's go and ask Ray, shall we?
Now, I didn't have a lot of time to really. Well, I did. I'm lying. I had a lot of time to think about it. I just didn't think of anything kind of pertinent. So I've borrowed a question from an old Five Live show, BBC show that I used to listen to a lot, and I've always sort of wanted an opportunity to ask this question to somebody. So this is it. So here it comes. You're having a sausage sandwich, red sauce, brown sauce, or no sauce at all?
Brown sauce. Definitely brown
All right.
sauce. It's the only
All
sensible.
right. I need to ask you about why.
I've had a lot of time to think about this. I too am a big fan of the Danny Baker show that it originated. I mean, red sauce with bacon. The sweetness goes quite well with bacon, but I think sausage needs a little bit of sour, sort of vinegary flavour. Otherwise, it needs something to cut through the sort of slight oily fattiness of the sausage. And so for that reason, definitely brown sauce.
Well, I wasn't expecting such an informed answer to that. You've really thought about the nuances and the tastes and everything that's involved here.
These things are important.
Okay, well, on that bombshell, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Ray. See you next time.